Ever since the incident at the village, Ratih and I stayed in contact more often than I expected. At first, it was mostly casual conversations about strange places, urban legends, and unexplained stories spreading online. We even started meeting occasionally because the hotel I stayed at during work trips in Jakarta turned out surprisingly close to the area where Ratih lived. Somehow, after everything we experienced together, normal life no longer felt completely normal anymore. Ratih admitted she started noticing strange things more frequently after returning from the village. Small things at first, strange dreams, sudden feelings of uneasiness in certain places. And honestly, I understood exactly what she meant. A few months later, Ratih contacted me late at night asking if I wanted to investigate something strange happening at Manggarai Station in Jakarta. According to her, several people online claimed they saw a train arriving after midnight that never appeared on official schedules. At first, I assumed it was just another internet horror story, but then Ratih sent me a short video clip recorded by one of the witnesses. The footage looked normal at first, a rainy platform at Manggarai sometime after midnight. Empty tracks, flickering fluorescent lights. Then suddenly, a commuter train slowly entered the station without any announcement at all. No destination display, no station warning. No incoming train alert, nothing, and according to the person recording the video, nobody remembered seeing the train leave afterward either, honestly. Something about the atmosphere inside the footage immediately felt wrong the moment I watched it for the first time. Ratih explained that the clip had already spread quietly across several Indonesian horror forums online. Some people believed the train only appeared during heavy rain late at night. Others connected it to old rumors about missing commuters around Manggarai over the years. Most people dismissed it as fake footage or internet storytelling. But honestly, Ratih herself didn't sound convinced it was fake at all. And after everything we experienced together at the village, I realized she usually trusted her instincts more than normal people did. Especially when certain places gave her a bad feeling for reasons she couldn't fully explain. We agreed to meet near Manggarai Station around 11 at night during one of the worst rainstorms Jakarta had seen that month. The atmosphere around the station already felt strange the moment I arrived there. Everything looked unusually empty despite the city normally staying busy even late at night. Rain hammered against metal rooftops while distant train sounds echoed somewhere beyond the darkness surrounding the tracks. The entire station somehow felt colder than it should have, not physically cold exactly, just heavy. Like the atmosphere itself was pressing down quietly against everything around us. Ratih was already waiting near one of the entrances wearing a dark raincoat while holding a small camera bag against her side. The moment she saw me approaching, her expression noticeably relaxed somehow. Honestly, that small reaction stayed in my mind longer than it probably should have, because after the village incident, I slowly realized Ratih only acted calmer whenever I was nearby, even inside places that genuinely frightened her, and honestly, for reasons I couldn't fully explain myself either, I also felt strangely calmer around her despite everything supernatural we'd already experienced together. At first, we spent hours speaking with station workers, food stall owners, and security guards around the area. Most people laughed off the rumors completely, but a few reacted differently the moment Ratih mentioned trains appearing after midnight during heavy rain. One older security guard immediately became quiet after hearing that question. Then carefully, almost nervously, he asked us why we wanted to know about something like that in the first place. The atmosphere around the conversation changed immediately after that. Even Ratih noticed it too. The man kept glancing occasionally toward the farther platforms near the edge of the station while speaking to us quietly. According to him, strange stories around Manggarai had existed for years. People hearing station announcements when no trains were arriving. Empty platforms suddenly becoming crowded for only a few seconds before returning normal again, and sometimes passengers accidentally boarding trains that never appeared on official station records afterward. Most workers dismissed the stories as exhaustion or imagination caused by late-night shifts. But honestly, the guard himself clearly didn't sound convinced anymore. Especially after Ratih asked whether anyone had ever disappeared after seeing the train. The man hesitated for several seconds before quietly admitting that a few years earlier, one commuter reportedly vanished after contacting his family saying he boarded the wrong train late at night near Manggarai. According to witnesses, he was last seen standing alone on platform 11 during heavy rain before suddenly disappearing completely afterward. At first, the story sounded almost impossible to believe, but honestly, after everything Ratih and I already experienced before, neither of us laughed at the idea anymore. Instead, the entire station somehow started feeling even heavier after hearing that story from the guard directly. Around midnight, the station became noticeably quieter. Most regular commuters had already left, leaving only a few scattered passengers waiting silently near different platforms. The rain somehow felt louder now. Heavy drops hitting metal rooftops echoed throughout the nearly empty station, while fluorescent lights flickered weakly above us. Ratih and I eventually sat near platform 11 while reviewing the witness footage again on her phone. The strange part was, the timestamp on the video matched an hour where no train was officially scheduled to arrive at Manggarai at all. Yet the footage clearly showed headlights approaching slowly through the rain before the train entered the station. At first, we tried finding logical explanations for everything. Maybe an unscheduled maintenance train. Maybe an old recording uploaded with the wrong timestamp, but honestly, even Ratih didn't sound convinced by those explanations herself anymore. Especially after noticing something strange hidden near the end of the footage. Just before the video ended, the person recording briefly turned the camera toward the large station clock above the platform. The clock showed exactly 1:13 in the morning. Then the video suddenly cut off completely, no ending. No explanation, nothing, and for some reason, Ratih kept replaying those final few seconds silently afterward. Around 12:30, one of the older station cleaning staff approached us quietly while carrying a wet mop bucket beside him. At first, he only warned us not to stay too late near the outer platforms during heavy rain. But after Ratih mentioned the strange train rumors again, the man suddenly became unusually serious. According to him, station workers sometimes heard train sounds arriving late at night despite no scheduled trains operating at all. Some even claimed they briefly saw passengers standing inside completely dark train cars before the trains disappeared again into the rain. Most workers refused discussing it openly because they feared being mocked afterward. The man eventually pointed toward one of the farthest platforms near the edge of the station. According to him, most sightings happened somewhere near that area after 1 in the morning, honestly. The moment he pointed there, I immediately felt uncomfortable for reasons I couldn't fully explain myself. The farther platforms looked darker than the rest of the station somehow, less crowded, less maintained. Even the fluorescent lights above them flickered more aggressively against the heavy rain surrounding the tracks. Ratih noticed my expression immediately and quietly asked if I felt something strange too. Honestly, I couldn't answer her properly, because the uncomfortable feeling wasn't exactly fear. It felt more like familiarity somehow. Like part of me recognized something about the atmosphere near the tracks even though I knew I'd never been there before. At exactly 1 in the morning, the atmosphere around Manggarai Station suddenly changed completely. The rain became lighter almost instantly. The station announcements stopped. Even the distant city sounds surrounding the area somehow faded into silence one by one. Then slowly, the large clock above platform 11 stopped moving entirely. Ratih noticed it first. The second hand froze exactly at 1:13 in the morning. and for several seconds neither of us said anything at all while staring up at the motionless clock above the station. That was when we finally heard it, the distant sound of train wheels approaching slowly through the darkness beyond the tracks nearby. But the strange part was, no station announcement followed afterward. No destination warning, no incoming train alert, nothing. The sound grew louder and louder until headlights finally appeared somewhere beyond the rain at the far end of the tracks, then slowly. A silver commuter train entered the station completely silently except for the sound of rainwater scraping against its metal surface. The electronic destination display above the front window flickered rapidly before eventually settling into a message that immediately made my stomach feel cold. It simply said, "Not for passengers." Honestly, seeing those words should have been enough for us to leave immediately. But instead, both Ratih and I just stood there silently watching the train stop perfectly beside the empty platform while cold rain drifted slowly through the station around us. The train doors opened a few seconds later with a low metallic sound echoing throughout the platform. Inside, the lights flickered weakly above rows of nearly empty passenger seats stretching deep into the carriage. At first, the train looked completely abandoned. Then I noticed movement near one of the far windows farther inside. Someone was sitting there completely motionless, their face hidden behind dim flickering lights inside the train car, and strangely enough, despite the heavy rain surrounding the station, none of the windows on the train had any water running across them at all. Ratih quietly asked if we should leave. Honestly, part of me wanted to immediately. But another part of me felt strangely drawn toward the train for reasons I still can't fully explain even now. It almost felt like the station itself had become unnaturally quiet, waiting for us to make a decision. Then suddenly, somewhere deeper inside the train, we heard the sound of a station announcement playing softly through broken speakers. But the voice didn't sound normal. The words were distorted beneath static noise, almost impossible to understand clearly. The only sentence we heard properly was, "Last departure," followed by heavy static before the announcement abruptly stopped again, and honestly, hearing those words somehow made the atmosphere around the station feel even colder immediately afterward. Ratih slowly stepped closer toward the train entrance while holding her camera tightly against her side. I followed beside her while the fluorescent lights above the platform flickered weakly one by one. Even the air near the train somehow smelled different, damp, metallic, old. The moment we entered the carriage, the station outside suddenly looked farther away than it should have through the windows somehow. The rain looked heavier too, almost like we had stepped into a completely different atmosphere the second the train doors closed behind us. Inside, the train felt unnaturally silent, no engine vibration. No passenger conversations, nothing, only the faint buzzing sound of fluorescent lights above us while cold air drifted slowly throughout the nearly empty carriage. Most of the seats were empty except for a few scattered passengers sitting alone far from each other. None of them looked toward us when we entered, in fact. They almost looked completely exhausted somehow, like people returning home after staying awake for days without rest. One older woman sitting near the middle of the carriage slowly lifted her head the moment I walked past her. For several seconds, she stared directly at me without blinking. Not angry, not afraid either. Honestly, her expression looked more like quiet recognition somehow. Before I could react properly, the train doors suddenly closed behind us with a loud metallic sound, then slowly. The train began moving through the darkness beyond Manggarai Station without any departure announcement at all. At first, the ride felt normal except for the uncomfortable silence inside the carriage. But after several minutes passed, Ratih quietly noticed something strange. According to the station route map above the doors, we should have already reached the next station by then. But outside the windows, there were no station lights at all, only darkness. Endless darkness moving slowly beside the train while faint rainwater patterns drifted across the glass outside. And honestly, the longer we kept moving forward, the heavier the atmosphere inside the carriage became. Ratih eventually checked her phone, hoping to track where we were along the train route, but there was no signal at all. Not even weak reception, the strange part was. My phone showed the exact same thing, even though Manggarai normally had strong coverage almost everywhere around the station area. A few minutes later, the lights inside the carriage flickered violently for several seconds before suddenly stabilizing again. And during that brief moment of darkness, I could have sworn there were far more passengers sitting inside the train than before. Honestly, at first I thought exhaustion was just affecting my vision. But Ratih quietly grabbed my arm immediately afterward and whispered that she saw it too, more people. Sitting silently throughout the carriage for only a few seconds before disappearing again once the lights returned normal. None of the remaining passengers reacted at all. They just continued staring downward silently while the train moved deeper into darkness outside the windows. The atmosphere inside the carriage somehow felt less like public transportation now, and more like waiting room silence before something terrible happens. Then suddenly, the train began slowing down. At first I assumed we were finally approaching another station. But the moment the carriage lights reflected against the windows outside, my stomach immediately felt cold. There was no station outside at all, no platform. No buildings, nothing, only thick fog stretching endlessly beyond the tracks beneath pale fluorescent lights standing alone in complete darkness. The train eventually stopped completely beside what looked like an abandoned platform hidden somewhere beyond the city. Honestly, calling it a station barely felt accurate. The place looked old, empty, almost forgotten somehow. Most disturbing of all, there was no station name visible anywhere, not on signs. Not on walls, nothing, just cracked concrete, flickering lights, and thick fog slowly drifting across the empty platform outside the train doors. Then, one by one, the passengers inside the carriage slowly stood up from their seats simultaneously. Nobody spoke, nobody looked at each other. They simply began walking silently toward the doors as if responding to instructions only they could hear. The older woman near the middle of the carriage stopped beside me briefly before leaving. For several seconds, she stared directly into my eyes again. Then quietly, almost sympathetically, she whispered, "You shouldn't still be here." Before I could ask what she meant, she stepped out onto the platform together with the others. Ratih immediately grabbed my arm tighter after hearing that sentence, honestly. The fear in her expression at that moment genuinely terrified me more than the train itself. Outside, the passengers slowly disappeared into the fog one by one without making any sound at all, no footsteps. No conversations, nothing, just silhouettes fading deeper into the white darkness beyond the abandoned platform. Ratih quietly whispered that we needed to leave immediately before the train started moving again. And honestly, for the first time since entering the carriage, I completely agreed with her without hesitation. The moment we stepped back toward the doors, the fluorescent lights inside the train suddenly flickered violently again. Then somewhere deeper inside another carriage behind us, we heard loud knocking sounds against the train windows. At first, the knocking sounded distant, slow, irregular, but within seconds it became louder and faster, like multiple people striking the glass rapidly from outside the moving train. Ratih immediately turned pale beside me, while the remaining passengers inside the carriage still refused to react at all. Then suddenly, the train doors slammed shut before we could step outside. The sound echoed violently throughout the carriage while the lights above us flickered again. And a second later, the train slowly began moving forward away from the abandoned platform without any warning at all. Ratih immediately tried pressing the emergency door button beside us, but nothing happened. No response, no warning sound, nothing, honestly. But then even I started feeling genuine panic rising for the first time that night. Outside the windows, the abandoned platform slowly disappeared back into thick fog until only darkness surrounded the train again. But strangely enough, the knocking sounds outside continued even after we left the station completely behind. At first, the sounds moved along the windows farther down the carriage. Then slowly, they started getting closer toward where Ratih and I stood. Soft, wet knocking against glass, moving seat by seat through the darkness outside. Ratih quietly told me not to look outside no matter what happened next. The way she said it immediately made my chest feel heavy somehow. Because despite everything supernatural we'd already experienced together, I rarely heard genuine fear in her voice before that moment. The knocking eventually stopped directly beside our window. Complete silence filled the carriage again for several long seconds, then slowly. I noticed water running downward across the outside glass for the first time since boarding the train, and mixed within the rainwater outside. I briefly saw what looked like fingerprints dragging downward against the window beside us from something standing outside the moving train. Honestly, every instinct told me not to look further, but somehow I still slowly turned my head toward the glass anyway. And the moment I did, the lights inside the carriage suddenly went completely dark. For maybe 2 or 3 seconds, the only thing visible inside the train was pale rain light drifting faintly through the windows around us. Then somewhere deeper inside the darkness, I heard breathing, very close. Ratih immediately grabbed my arm tightly beside me without saying anything. I could feel her hands shaking violently while the entire carriage remained completely silent except for faint breathing sounds somewhere nearby. Then the lights suddenly returned all at once, and the moment they did, several passengers were now sitting much closer to us than before, completely motionless, faces lowered, silent beneath the flickering fluorescent lights above the carriage. None of them looked normal anymore either. Their clothes looked soaked despite the dry interior of the train. Pale water dripped slowly onto the floor beneath their seats, while the smell of damp air inside the carriage suddenly became much stronger. The older woman from earlier was now sitting directly across from us somehow, even though both Ratih and I clearly saw her leave the train at the abandoned platform before. And honestly, seeing her there again made my stomach immediately drop. Slowly, she lifted her head again toward me. Then quietly she whispered, "You need to wake up before it's too late." The moment she said those words, Ratih immediately froze beside me completely. Before either of us could respond, the station announcement speakers above the carriage suddenly activated again beneath heavy static noise. Then a distorted voice quietly repeated, "Final stop, final stop." At the exact same moment, the train suddenly accelerated violently forward. The lights flickered non-stop while darkness outside the windows blurred together unnaturally fast. Honestly, it no longer felt like we were moving through Jakarta anymore. Ratih immediately pulled me down into one of the empty seats while covering her ears tightly. Around us, the silent passengers slowly began turning their heads toward our direction one by one beneath the flickering lights. And somehow, despite their faces looking completely different from each other, every single expression carried the exact same exhausted emptiness. Like people trapped somewhere they no longer fully understood themselves. Then suddenly, the train brakes screamed violently throughout the carriage. The force nearly threw both of us forward from our seats while the lights above us exploded into darkness again for several seconds. And when the lights finally returned, Ratih and I were suddenly standing alone back at Manggarai Station again. The train was completely gone, the rain had returned heavily, and the large station clock above platform 11 now showed exactly 1:14 in the morning. For several seconds, neither of us said anything at all, honestly. My mind still struggled processing what had just happened. The station around us looked completely normal again. Distant commuter announcements returned. People walked through nearby platforms casually like nothing unusual had happened at all. But the atmosphere around Ratih felt completely different now. She looked pale beneath the station lights while gripping her camera bag tightly against her side. And honestly, I realized I'd never seen her that shaken before. Not even back at the village. Eventually, I asked her what happened inside the train after the lights went out. At first, she stayed silent for several seconds before quietly admitting something that immediately made my chest feel cold again. According to Ratih, during those few seconds of darkness, she briefly heard dozens of voices whispering throughout the carriage at the same time. Some sounded distant, some sounded extremely close, but almost all of them repeated the same sentence over and over again. They missed their stop. That was what Ratih claimed the voices kept whispering inside the darkness surrounding the carriage, honestly. Even hearing her repeat those words afterwards somehow made the station around us feel quieter immediately. We eventually decided to leave Manggarai before staying any longer inside the station. But while walking toward the exit tunnel, Ratih suddenly stopped beside one of the large digital schedule boards hanging above the station corridor. At first, I assumed she noticed another strange train schedule. But when I followed her gaze upward, I realized the board itself looked completely normal. Except for one thing, for maybe a single second. The arrival time on the screen briefly displayed, then immediately changed back to normal again before anyone else around us seemed to notice it. Ratih didn't say anything afterward, but honestly, the expression on her face told me she definitely saw it too. Outside the station, Jakarta looked alive again despite the heavy rain. Cars moved normally. Street vendors still worked beneath plastic tents. Motorcycles passed through wet roads under glowing city lights, yet somehow, after what happened inside the train, the entire city felt slightly unfamiliar to me now. Ratih eventually admitted something while we waited beneath a roadside shelter for the rain to slow down. According to her, places connected to strong emotional energy sometimes became what she described as crossing points, places where certain things could accidentally move between worlds more easily than normal. Honestly, I asked whether she believed the passengers on the train were ghosts, but Ratih slowly shook her head after hearing that question. Then quietly she said something that somehow felt even more disturbing. She said, "I don't think they fully realized where they were." The moment she said that, I immediately remembered the exhausted expressions on the passengers' faces inside the carriage. Not angry, not violent, just lost somehow. For some reason, that thought stayed with me much longer than the fear itself afterward. The idea that people could accidentally end up somewhere they were never supposed to be, without fully understanding it until it was already too late. Before leaving, Ratih finally checked the footage recorded on her camera throughout the night. Most of the videos looked completely normal at first: rain, platforms, empty tracks. But the moment she reached the footage recorded during 1:13 in the morning, the entire file suddenly corrupted. The screen filled with static noise for several seconds before freezing completely, then for maybe a single frame. Both of us briefly saw the inside of the train carriage again hidden beneath the distortion, and standing far behind the passengers near the end of the carriage was a tall shadowy figure neither of us remembered seeing that night at all. Honestly, Ratih immediately closed the video after that without replaying it again. Neither of us really discussed the figure afterward either, because somehow both of us already understood the same thing immediately. Whatever arrived at Manggarai Station during heavy rain at 1:13 in the morning wasn't simply a ghost story people created online for attention. And honestly, after everything Ratih and I experienced that night, I started realizing something else too. The deeper we investigated places connected to unexplained stories around Indonesia, the more it felt like certain places were quietly connected somehow, like hidden doors existing beside the normal world. Most people pass by them every day without noticing anything unusual at all. But sometimes, under the right conditions, those doors accidentally open for just a few moments, and if someone enters at the wrong time, they might never fully find their way back again. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next exploration into the unknown here on Nusantara Nocturne. and tell me in the comments. If a train arrived at your station late at night with no destination and no schedule, would you step inside? Until next time, stay safe and be careful which train you choose to board after midnight